Welcome to episode 224. Tonight on Book Chat, I'm interviewing voiceover actor and audiobook narrator Tom Jordan. Stay tuned. Today's episode is brought to you by Audiobooks.com. New customers get one free audiobook when using our promo code AudioShelf. You just need to enter the code AudioShelf on the sign-up page, then click Apply, then fill out the rest of your account info. Support this podcast by using our code AudioShelf and get your first audiobook free. Hey everyone, I am your host, Tamara Ford, and welcome to Book Chat here on the Shelf Addiction Podcast. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, I'm so glad you're listening. Here on Book Chat, we get bookish with roundtable book discussions, book recommendation lists, interviews, and more. Be sure to check out shelfaddiction.com for even more content. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about today's interview guest. Tom Jordan stumbled upon voice acting in 1994 through a friend who worked for a local LA radio station. When podcasting started in 95, Tom jumped on the chance to build a modest home studio, and he created his own shows without having to take away from his family or job. One of these podcasts, The Unreal OC, he did with his wife Elizabeth, and there are still dozens of hilarious episodes you can check out online at www.theunrealoc.com. Tom started recording audiobooks in May of 2017, so while he's a newcomer to the field, he is no stranger to narration. Tom has produced all 30 of the books he's narrated. They can be found on Audible using the link below. You can listen to some samples of his narration as well as his commercial demo on his website, www.tomvoiceover.com. If you'd like to comment on something you've heard during today's episode, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shelf Addiction, or call in and leave an internet voice message via SpeakPipe. The links for everything related to today's episode are below in the show notes. Hey Tom, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Tamara. How are you?
I'm doing good. Let's jump into this because we have a lot to talk about with a little bit of time. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit how you got into audiobook narration.
Sure. I started in voiceover in general back in the early 90s, way back before the internet was around and where you had to drive. I'm in Southern California, but not real close to LA. So there was a lot of driving to Burbank just for auditions. I mean, you can imagine how many auditions you have to do and how few actual gigs you get from those. So I was doing a lot of driving and not getting a lot of work. The internet came around and I started doing that. So we're flash forwarding about 8 years and I started doing that. In the meantime, I had a children on the way and I was married and I realized that this was not going to be a full-time job. So I started doing it part-time. In the mid 2000s, I kind of moved away from voiceover and got into podcasting for about 5 or 6 years and had several podcasts. And then just 2 years ago, I started getting back into voiceover because I started doing voiceover for my work. I'm a marketing communications writer and marketing writer in general. And well, they started using me because of my voiceover background to do a lot of promos and e-learning and training video narration for my work. And I thought, well, instead of making this seem like a chore, why don't I make it seem like practice for moonlighting, as you will, for voiceover. So that's how that started a couple years ago. My mentor was doing audiobooks, and he kept encouraging me to jump onto ACX, which is Audiobook Creation Exchange, owned by Audible, and that's where narrators hook up with authors, and it's kind of like a dating service, but it's for narrators hooking up with authors that need to have narration done. So I did that, got a couple of books right off the bat, and it's just been kind of nonstop for the past 14 months or so that I've been doing audiobook narration. So that's kind of that. I really love audiobook narration because instead of doing 100 auditions for one gig in a pay-to-play situation, I'm finding that the ratio is much higher for me to be able to get the books that I'm looking for. And also when I'm in the morning recording, I'm not just throwing auditions out into the ether. I'm actually recording a chapter that's going to be going into a book that will someday be in somebody's iPod or phone that they're listening.
Sounds like audiobook narration is a lot more satisfying than just voiceover work.
Very good way of putting it. For me, it is. I really do enjoy it. And I'm kind of a natural storyteller to begin with, so it just kind of clicked. Everything gelled with the narration. And since I've got a day job that pays the mortgage, I can do audiobook narration in the margins and continue on just plugging away with it. And I just absolutely love it.
Okay. So since you're doing that kind of as a side gig, do you put extra effort in finding books that you're actually, thinking you may enjoy? Are you nitpicky a little bit because this isn't your full-time job?
I am doing that now. Yes. I think that even in the beginning, I got some great, sweet, historical romances that I did and I would still do some of those too. They were just really great books too. They were easier to read than a really, intense, complicated thriller with 19 different accents, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
starting with those was great. I also hooked up with a guy named Justin Johnson, who was a children's writer, but he jumped off the children's genre and into deep, dark thrillers, very, very short stories. But I did about 10 of those for him. And these are really short, so they don't sell really well because on Audible, nobody really wants to throw their $14.99 credits each month that they get into a 20-minute book.
Mm-hmm.
But they had great covers. They were really well written, and they had great characters that I was able to, again, kind of help evolve my narration skills by doing those. So I did several of those at the beginning too. Recently, I've been doing thrillers and mysteries, and I just love them. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
So would you say thrillers and mysteries are your favorite genre to narrate then out of everything?
Out of everything that I've done so far, which isn't real expensive, but it includes romance and a couple of biographies, nonfiction, and I did a children's book as well. So, yeah, and in addition to those, thrillers are right up there at the top.
Wonderful. Do you listen to audiobooks for fun in your own time?
I do. And more I've been listening to audiobooks from narrators that I aspire to someday maybe get even in the same ballpark. So yeah, so there's been Ray Porter is somebody that I've been listening to a lot of lately, is the Joe Ledger series by Jonathan Mayberry. I think I got that last name right, but it's the Joe Ledger series that he does. It's just amazing. So listening to him, of course, R.C. Bray, Johnny Heller, these people that are kind of the superstars of audio narration. But there's a lot of good ones too that are out there. There's a lot of talent out there. But I think, because I'm kind of a natural mimic anyway, and I don't want to sound like these people, but you take bits of what they do really well and you try to incorporate them. You take, I like the way they do their pauses between whatever, or I like the way that their inflections are when they're this type of a character. And so you kind of piece things together, and I bring that into my toolkit because I'm still developing, and I think probably always will be, but listening to the best of the best right now is kind of where I'm going.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are a lot of really talented narrators out there because as an audiobook listener, I definitely every month I come across new narrators I've never heard from before, and they're all amazing. They all really do a good job.
Right. And I want to make
Right.
sure that I got the author's name. It's Jonathan Mayberry. I may have said Jonathan Bayberry, but anyway, that was for the Joe Ledger
Okay.
series, just for the record.
All right. So what about your dream author? Do you have one that you love their writing and one day you would love to do an audiobook for them?
Dean Koontz is right up there. I'd love to do that. Stephen King. There's quite a few, but all within that genre. And I guess Dean Koontz sticks out because he was probably the first audiobook that I listened to. I don't know, 10 years ago or more. And because he's had his books turned into audiobooks way before Audible was around. And I've listened to just about every one of his books. And he's got great narration going on all these things. But I've always thought, boy, wouldn't that be great to be able to do that? So that's the
Yeah.
sticks out in my mind. But hey, I'm open. So
Okay, so since you have, a lot of experience in marketing and things, I thought it would be fun for you to share some tips to both authors using ACX as well as narrators looking for work on ACX. Let's just jump into that. You want to start with your top couple of tips for authors that are looking for narrators?
yeah, absolutely. And there are a couple of books out there that you can actually get as an author to kind of give you the tips and the right way to move into audiobooks. I'm actually doing a talk in early September to the California Writers Club Long Beach chapter on, and this is independent authors primarily, moving into audiobooks. So this is good prep for that. There's a tremendous opportunity within audiobooks, and some of the things that you want to do. First of all, you want to be able to choose your narrator wisely. If you're doing a royalty share, which is one of the two ways that you get paid off of ACX, if that's the direction you're going. Royalty share, you will get 20% as an author. The narrator will get 20%, and Audible will end up with 60%. So you're splitting that with the narrator. You want to make sure that the narrator that you choose is going to be a good business partner, that they are really good with communication, that they understand what it takes to market a book, an audiobook, once you have it up on Audible, that they continue to stay in contact with you. I love working with authors, and independent authors in particular. It's just one of my favorite things to do, and I'm constantly got conversations going with them on Facebook Messenger and so forth. And there's a lot of Facebook groups that help you to promote your books, and there has to be an ongoing conversation with your narrator. Now, there is a school of thought with some narrators that once you've done the book, it's up to the author or the holder to do the promotion, and you can just step back. I'm not a believer in that. I think that there's a lot of benefits as a narrator to work with the author. And I'll move into that when we get to the narrator's point of view. But really, choosing the narrator is very important. Don't choose the narrator based on when you want the book to be finished. In other words, if you're in a hurry and you've got a great narrator that did a great audition, don't think to yourself, well, this person can't get to it for 2 months. I need to choose somebody that can do it quicker because I can't wait for my book to be turned into an audiobook and listen to it come alive. Think about the fact that in 3 months, either way, your book is going to be up on Audible. Are you going to be proud of it with the narrator that you've chosen, or are you going to be cringing when you listen to it? And that means your audience will be cringing too. So either way, look ahead for your 6 months and think it's going to be up either way. How is it going to reflect on what I've done and the choices I've made in choosing a narrator? There's a ton of stuff that I could go into. I've got an hour talk, like I said, already in my head, but that's kind of the biggest thing I would say would be to just choose your narrator carefully and make sure that they communicate well and that they're willing to work with you in marketing.
Well, I am a very huge advocate of audiobooks, if you can't tell already. And I've come across a lot of indie authors, even small press authors, that don't choose to use an audiobook. And I want to know from you how you can convince them that they need it. We want audiobooks.
Yeah, I think that, from what I've heard and from my experiences with working with independent authors, the main stumbling block, the main roadblock for them is the technology. They're afraid that, well, first of all, they're afraid it's going to cost them money. And it really doesn't. It doesn't cost anything. ACX doesn't charge to move your book into it from Amazon. So you have to have an Amazon presence of a Kindle book or softcover. Pretty sure it has to be in Kindle format. But it doesn't cost anything to say, hey, I'm going to list it on ACX and audition narrators. So there's that. So there's no cost involved right off the bat with that. There's also is it going to require any technical knowledge? I'm a writer. I still use a typewriter. What is it going to take for me to be able so the technical part isn't really anything. The narrator produces this, and that requires technical skill on their end. All you have to do as an author is listen to the MP3 files that are just a click away on your computer and make sure that everything sounds the way that it should. And you're golden, at the end. And then you click I'm done. And within a week or two, your audiobook is up on Audible. So, yeah, I mean, as far as convincing them goes, I don't know. There are a number of roadblocks. I guess, too, they don't understand that, the audiobook market is growing depends on
Mm-hmm.
20 to 30% every single year after year. You're right. You do need to have a presence in audio, and it's quite simple to do, and it can be achieved in a weekend, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like authors who choose that, not to go the audiobook route, like you said, the market is growing. They are missing out. They're missing out on people that could enjoy their story that only listen to audiobooks because they're so busy, or, they're really missing audience by not doing that.
They are. And audiobooks can be moneymakers for them. There are plenty of examples where the audiobook makes quite a bit, sells quite a bit more than the Kindle book, for example. There's people
Mm-hmm.
that commute. I mean, we've come so far with listening to books in general. The barriers to entry have broken down, primarily because it's so easy for people now to listen to audiobooks. And maybe that's another thing that authors need to understand is that, you look back even 12 years ago, there were still cassettes with books on them. Maybe 15 years ago for cassettes and beyond. So there were books on tape, and you had to juggle cassettes to put into your car. And how many cassettes does it take for an 11-hour book? Then there were CDs. We moved into that. You still had to mess with CDs. You got an hour per CD, and you still had to swap them out. It got a little bit easier, and then we still had to have a CD. I'm thinking primarily like for commuters and people that are listening while driving, but it could be even walking around, cleaning around your house or wherever your passive activity that you might be doing, listening to it. Then all of a sudden now it's on everybody's phone. I've got over 40 audiobooks on my phone, and I can listen to my car because all the cars nowadays are Bluetooth capable, and they
Mm-hmm.
made that way if they're not already very cheaply. And bang, you've got audiobooks anywhere you want them. So the barriers to entry have been broken down, and that's helped to increase the sales. And it's just like anything else. It's like going to the gym. If you know that it's going to take you half an hour to park, how often are you going to go? But if it doesn't take you any time, so all the barriers to entry need to be broken down, and they really have gotten to that point right now.
Wonderful. Okay, let's switch gears. I don't know if we hit all top three, but we spent a good amount of time on that. So let's talk about the narrators. For those looking for work in audiobook narration, do you have any suggestions for them?
Yeah, exactly. There's one big tip that I like to provide, and that is kind of something that I do when there's a book that I really want that I have narrated, that I've done an audition for. First of all, I always use that little notes space in ACX to say thank you for this opportunity, or thank you for your time and consideration. I know because I'm also an author and I've posted a book on ACX and gone through the audition process, that you don't see that necessarily as an author. Those are kind of hidden. You've got the audition, you click on that, you go to the next one, you keep going, but you don't necessarily see that little note left by the narrator. So that's one thing to think about. But I always leave that anyway as a narrator when I leave an audition. But in addition to that, I also write the rights holder a note. So I send, using the ACX messenger service, I send them a real quick note. Hey, thanks. Sounds like a great book. And what I say is, if there's any other portion of your manuscript that you'd like to hear as an audition, I'd be happy to provide that as an additional audition for you. Perhaps something with more dialogue or different characters, or, and here's the tip, perhaps there's a favorite part of the book that you'd like, your favorite part of the book that you'd like to hear. Because every author has got a favorite part of their book. And there's a very good chance that it's not your favorite part. It's just something personal to them. they really like to hear their books come to life and to hear their favorite part of the book, which probably isn't the part of the manuscript that they provided for the audition.
Mm-hmm.
Give them that opportunity to hear that brought to life. And that is something that I've done, and so far have had 3 out of 3 authors choose me for their books based upon, partially, I'm sure, based upon the fact that they just loved the fact that I asked for that and that I was willing to provide an additional audition. It takes 25 minutes to do a 5-minute audition and edit it and send it off. That's something you can spare if there's a book that you really want. So,
Right.
so that's what I would say. There's a lot of tips for narrators. I never give performance tips because I'm so new. But as far as looking at ACX, choosing books to narrate and that type of thing, I love working with new narrators that are just in shock by the number of options that there are for the books out there, and how do they choose. Stay away from the how to tie your shoe books, the
Right.
1 hour, books that are just thrown up there. Basically, they're almost spam in a sense, because they're people that write these really tiny Kindle books and want to get audiobooks made out of them just to try to generate income or whatever their motivation might be. So you stay away from those. Look for quality books. There's nothing wrong with starting out with an hour book when you're just beginning. And of course, you want to get into that 6 to 10 sweet spot of finished hours whenever you can and as soon as you can, because that's what people buy, and beyond 10 hours as well. People like to get their money's worth when they're buying things from their subscription to Audible. But that doesn't mean you have to start out with a 6-hour book. That could be quite discouraging when you're in a booth and you're just learning the ropes. So choose quality books that are shorter when you're starting out and move as quickly as you can up to the longer ones based upon how you feel and your skill level.
That's good advice, because there's actually a ton of novellas and short stories and anthologies, all kind of things that may be shorter in length but have quality that you're looking for.
Absolutely.
One last thing on advice. Do you have any advice for those that are brand new who have never, ever done an audiobook, but they want to? Like, you made that transition. What do you recommend that they do to see if they're even able to sustain that type of career?
Look up Sean Pratt's So You Want to Be an Audiobook Narrator on YouTube. That's a good 3 or 4 minute video. Sean kind of gives you an idea of what it takes. Sean does talk about sitting in a booth for quite a while reading, and that is what it takes. You have to build up to that stamina. So that's a good place to start. Go to be familiar with Facebook and in the groups that deal with audiobooks, and there's quite a few of them out there. Go to Audiobook Lovers, which is a Facebook group that I co-admin with Barbara Goss, who was the first author that I worked with when I first got into narration. And she and I have remained friends over the past year or more. And that's a good place to go, because you've got narrators, you've got audiobook listeners, and you've got authors that are all part of that group. And we encourage people to ask questions. And for newbies saying, hey, how do I get started? We have absolutely no problem with that. You're going to get 25 responses in 24 hours of people that give you ideas on how to get started. ACX, you want to set up an account on acx.com. And again, that's the Audiobook Creation Exchange. That is owned by Audible. That's owned by Amazon. And ACX doesn't cost you anything to get started. You do have to have a couple of samples of reading an audiobook. Now, that can be a book of your choosing. It can be a one that's in the public domain, or it can be a portion of one that's a popular book that's already out there. There isn't too much concern, and I don't want to give any bad advice here, but a lot of people use popular novels. I'd stay away from the Dan Browns and the Jean Le Carré's and the really popular ones, but you can choose a portion of a book and read it. Don't read The Martian. Everybody's going to compare you to R.C. Bray if you do that.
Right.
You
Right.
a portion of a book, or choose something from the public domain if you want to do that, which is books that are in the 70 to 100-year-old range. And read 5 minutes into a microphone, edit it, send it go on to Audiobook Lovers or another audiobook group on Facebook and ask for somebody to listen to it so they can give you feedback on it before you post it. If you're that brand new, coaching is hugely important. There are a bunch of coaches out there. I just was coached yesterday with Johnny Heller, my first time one-on-one with him. Been to a couple of his workshops and was blown away by how much I learned in the hour that I spent with him. He's great for newbies as well. There's a lot of different paths to go. There's a lot of peer there are peer critique groups as well where you can get good feedback from your peers. So I hope that isn't
Oh, that's good to know.
information. But yeah, being new in this, just your best shot. You're going to get a lot of opinions if you just go onto Facebook and you go into one of the groups like Audiobook Lovers, and just ask that question, and you're going to get and you can start the conversation with other narrators that way and get really solid advice on where to start.
Excellent. Okay, so let's switch gears here, and we're going to listen to a snippet from One-Eyed Jack, which is an audiobook that was released earlier this year. We're going to listen to the quick snippet, and then we're going to talk about that.
I make my living by keeping secrets. Actually, I make it by letting others keep theirs. That's right, I'm that guy. The blackmailer, the extortionist. The guy you never see and wish you had never heard from. I'm the one who sees into the dark corners of your soul, the parts of your life you want to remain hidden. Fancy yourself a religious man who attends church every Sunday, but who has a propensity for porn shops the other 6 days of the week. Don't worry, the congregation will never know as long as you keep tithing into my collection plate. Let's call it a sin tax.
All right, so now that we've heard that snippet, Tom, why don't you tell me a little bit about what we've just heard?
Sure. That's the beginning of One-Eyed Jack. That's the first book in the series written by Christopher J. Lynch. He's a local writer here in Southern California. Great thriller writer, great mystery writer. One-Eyed Jack, his name is John Sharp, also known as One-Eyed Jack. He is a professional blackmailer. I love this book and I love the series. I just finished the second one in the series, Russian Roulette, narrating that for Chris, and that's going to be available in a couple weeks on Audible. And he's got at least 2 more books in the series. So, a professional blackmailer, you think private eye, you think detective story, you think true crime. I've never experienced a story before on a professional blackmailer, and One-Eyed Jack is his in a despicable profession, if you want to, elevate it to that level of a name. He has a heart of gold. He treats people well, regardless of what he does for a living and how he makes his money. He gets tangled up in a lot of crazy conflicts and adventures in One-Eyed Jack. There's love interests. It's just a fun listen. It was a blast to narrate. That was the most fun I had had narrating a book up to that point. When I clicked I'm done with that book, I was just like, oh, this was such a blast. And I was thrilled to be able to do the second one as well, which is just as, I don't know if I should use the word riveting because that really is dependent on the listener, but I think it was a blast to read, and it's so well written. And Chris has really got a good thing going with that series. So yeah, it was fun. That's available on Audible. One-Eyed Jack is, and check it out.
A villain with a heart is very different. You don't hear that. Well, I don't read that trope a lot where you have a really bad, someone doing bad things who's really a good person. And that's what it sounds like Jack is.
Right. And I mean, everybody that he's busting and blackmailing is doing something really wrong in turn. So he's not a hero. He's an anti-hero in a sense, because he's, there's people that are cheating on their wives or cheating the IRS or doing whatever. He's busting them for it, blackmailing them, getting money back in return. But they're the ones that are really doing the wrongdoing.
Oh, no.
He wouldn't be making his money. So it's a really great, complicated trope in a sense, but fun to listen to, and it just breezes right by. It's good stuff. Good stuff.
Oh, sounds good. Is it funny? Sounds like it's got a little bit of humor.
Got humor in it too. Yeah. And he's got a real wry sense of humor, and the characters that he meets and the people that have done wrong, and how he gets tangled up in their lives and so forth. Yeah, a lot of good stuff there.
Well, you guys definitely check out One-Eyed Jack. You'll find a link in the show notes. You'll also find a link for the entirety of Tom's US available audiobooks on Audible. So if you'd like to check that out as well. But let's change gears again. I've heard you've been nominated for a Roan Award. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just found that out a couple weeks back. Yeah, that was nice. So author Aubrey Wynn wrote this great book called Dante's Gift, and it got voted on and brought up to the level of finalist on InDescribe magazine, and Indie Tale magazine, which is for independent authors and publishers. And then InDescribe is the conference that they have every year. And this year it's in Burbank, and they have the Roan Awards, which I'm going to attend because I'm local enough to Burbank. And I think that's going to be a blast. So there's 4 other audiobooks in the audiobook category. Most of the awards go to books themselves, not audiobooks, but they do have this year an audiobook category. And out of the 4 books, Dante's Gift is one of them. And I narrated that for Aubrey just back last November, I think. And it's a sweet romance. And it was a blast to narrate, and I'm thrilled to be able to be nominated for that.
Oh, well, good luck.
Thank you.
Awesome. So what other projects do you have on the horizon?
I have, I just accepted an offer yesterday to narrate a book by Dwayne Alexander Smith, who wrote the book 40 Acres. And this book that I'm going to narrate is called The Unkind Hours, and it's a thriller. Shocker. It just looks fantastic. When I read the synopsis of it, I was like, oh, I've got to get this book. And again, I did the audition. I contacted him through the ACX Messenger. I said, hey, if you decide that I'm the right voice for this talent, hopefully we can work on it, because I've got another project that's coming up. I've got the 3rd book in another thriller series that I've got to do in July. So I've got to be able to do that, and in between all these other things, and have the full-time job, and have 3 kids and a wife and 2 dogs. So
yeah, full plate.
He was willing to work with me on the date, and I'm just going to have to work my rear end off this summer to get this book done, because it's an 8-hour book, and 8-hour book to somebody who's doing audiobooks full time is 6 days of work. For me, it's a month and a half. So I'll get it done, and I'm really looking forward to that. So that's going to be coming out. Look for that in the fall. That's The Unkind Hours.
Wonderful. Okay, so I guess we're going to end things there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Tom.
Thanks, Tamara, so much.
Absolutely. So you can find all of Tom's social media links below in the show notes. If you'd like to contact him, feel free. Thanks for streaming and downloading today's episode. And until next time, take care, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode and would like to show your support, there are a few things you can do. Head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a positive 5-star review. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Most importantly, you can share this podcast with friends and family that love pop culture, from books and audiobooks to TV and movies. I'll see you next time here on the Shelf Addiction Podcast.